power is rising. Its victory is at hand. This year, the land will be stained with the blood of Khety. March to Abdju. Drive them away. To war!
So the Thebans had taken Abdju, or Abydos. This was significant for several reasons. In a geographic sense, the victory at Abdju brought security to Intef's new empire. The city is located just north, or downriver, from the Kenna Bend, that great eastward movement of the Nile. By capturing Abdju, Intef's forces now controlled the entire Kenna Bend, from south to north and east to west. They also controlled the desert roads that passed through that bend between the two ends of the river. So the conquest of Abdju had a strategic and military value. It significantly shortened the defensive lines and allowed the Thebans to concentrate their forces into one central location. Additionally, the capture of Abdju itself was probably a great cultural win. To be the new caretakers of the temples here, not to mention the tombs of Egypt's earliest kings, that might have brought greater legitimacy to the southern household. After all, victories are not won by humans alone, they require divine blessing. And just as Intef had honored Amun-Ra in the tiny sanctuary at Karnak, and the gods and goddesses of Abu or Elephantine, now he could honor Usir, Anpu, Anhur, and more in the ancient region of Ta-Wer. However, this was no time to rest. The conquest of Abdju was significant, and the royal visit recorded by Iduju Iker demonstrates its importance. But while Abdju was valuable, it was not the only major city in this district. In fact, Abdju was not even the capital of the Ta-Wer district. That honor belonged to another town just a few kilometers downriver, a town called Khety. Khety, or Thesis, is old, really old, one of the oldest royal centers in the country. Khety seems to be the place where Egypt's first rulers, people like Namer and Horus Aha, emerged to prominence while unifying the country. These rulers built their tombs at Abdju, Abydos, but they ruled from Khety, or Thesis. At least, that is how the ancient traditions remembered it. Unfortunately, the city of Khety remains undiscovered by archaeologists, but Greek historians like Manetho described Khety, Thesis, as the major center of the early kingdom. And while the city's prominence had declined as the government moved further north, the city remained a site of great prestige and antiquity. But Khety remained in the hands of the North, and they were going to fight for it. Our first hint of the unfolding conflict comes from another of Intef's officials, a man called Jari, who was the overseer of troops. He left a stela in the region of Waset, or Luxor. The stela describes the usual pomp and ceremony and his duties. But during that spiel, Jari reveals the next phase of the war. Quote, "The king of southern and northern Egypt, the son of Ra, Intef the Great, born of Neferu, sent for me after I had fought against the House of Khety, to the west of the city of Khety, or Thesis. The king caused his messengers to come." End quote. Couple of things to note here. Jari gives us one of the rare contemporary references to the northern kingdom as the Per Khety, or House of Khety. We know this name from other monuments, but it's not common, and the term might actually be derogatory. The phrase House of Khety tends to show up on southern monuments, and the servants of Intef and the other Theban rulers do not refer to the northern king as a king. They don't use the word Nesut to describe him. This makes sense. Intef II had already declared himself Nesut Beti, king of southern and northern Egypt, and he carved that in stone at Karnak. The Egyptian view of the world did not really allow for two kings at the same time, so references to the northern kingdom as the House of Khety might actually be an insult, a way of denying them the status of kingdom, and denying them legitimacy in the face of southern aggression. The other key point in this text is the battle, which took place near to the city of Cheni, Thinis. Jari specifically mentions the west region of this city. That might be the desert roads that lead away from the Nile, or it could be the hinterland near Cheni, but not the city itself. Apparently, Jari did not attack the town, at least not directly, but he and his troops ranged across the district, and they brought some of the northern soldiers to battle. We don't know if Jari was victorious, but I actually suspect he wasn't. Earlier, we read the biography of Gemi, who attacked Abydos. That official was quite proud of his victory, mentioning his ability to drive away the foe, even when no one else could. And Gemi had specifically said, quote, "I have come home successfully from that encounter." By contrast, Jari does not include those descriptions of victory. He just mentions fighting. And Gemi notes that immediately after this battle, he actually received a message from King Intef summoning him back to court. At the risk of reading too much between the lines, I think Jari and his soldiers might have lost this battle or raid. Perhaps they went too far into enemy territory, or came up against a foe for whom they were not prepared. Either way, the lack of detail in Jari's description, and the royal summons that came soon after, has me thinking that he might have lost. I'm just speculating here, but if that is correct, perhaps Jari and his troops bit off more than they could chew, or maybe they were testing the enemy defenses, and when the city of Cheni proved stronger than expected, the king ordered his forces to withdraw. So the first foray against Cheni, downriver from Abydos, might have been a failure. Jari and his soldiers came home, and when he carved his stela describing his duties and the battle, Jari was suspiciously silent on the subject of victory. You might expect Jari to simply ignore the military engagement altogether in order to sweep his failure under the rug, but it's possible he was still proud of his effort, his bravery and his willingness to go deep into enemy territory. Either way, when he carved his stela, Jari broke the Basil Fawlty rule, and he mentioned the war.
I can't! I've got too much to do. Listen, don't mention the war. I mentioned it once, but I think I got away with it all right. So, it's all forgotten now, and let's hear no more about it.
Jari's raid is a good spot to pause our tale of Theban expansion and look at things from the other perspective. It's been a while since we caught up with the House of Khety, the legitimate ruling power of the north. With so much going on in the south, the kingdom downriver has been a bit quiet. Well, that changes around the time of Intef. The northern monarchs themselves are not well attested. We do have some detailed records for a couple of them, whom I'll introduce in the next chapter. But for the conflict around Abdju and Cheni, there is a group of officials that we need to introduce. These are the great overlords of a city called Asyut. Asyut is the modern name for an ancient town called Zauti. If you play Total War Pharaoh, you'll find the province of Zauti just north of the Abdju region. Zauti, Asyut, and its overlords are a significant part of the First Intermediate story. The reason for this is their tombs. The overlords of Asyut commissioned elaborate burial monuments in the cliffs overlooking their towns. Those monuments have been the subject of scholarly study ever since the French invasion of Egypt during the days of Napoleon. Today, the tombs of Asyut are badly degraded. The local bedrock here is terrible for preservation. but archaeological projects continue to work at conservation and restoration on the monuments, and the tombs of Asyut still preserve some wonderful art and biographical inscriptions that describe the work of their overlords. These overlords served the House of Khety. They were powerful rulers in their own right, but they gave loyalty to the king in the north. And thanks to the inscriptions from their tombs, we actually have a lot of information about the ongoing conflict with the south. Allow me to introduce a man called It-Ibi. It-Ibi was one of the great overlords of the Asyut or Zauti region. He probably lived around 2050 to 2030 BCE, give or take. It-Ibi left a tomb in the local cemetery, one that includes a biography of his service to the crown. It-Ibi fought on behalf of the House of Khety, and he took pride in his ability to give security to his region and to face the southerners. It-Ibi's biography opens with a description of his good rule, his beneficence towards his people, and to the safety his army provided. Quote, "The hereditary noble, the count, the seal-bearer for the king of northern Egypt, the sole companion, the high priest of Wep-Wawet, the lord of Zauti, Asyut." It-Ibi says the following: "I was one who was open-handed to everyone. I was one with excellent plans, useful to his city, one who was kind of face towards a petitioner, who was open of face towards the widow. I was a river, literally a Nile, for his people. When night came, even those who sleep on the road gave me praise, for he was as safe as a man sleeping in his own house. The terror of my soldiers was his protection." End quote. So It-Ibi was a guardian, a boss or capo able to provide security throughout his district. Even to wanderers who slept under the sky, It-Ibi's territory was just as safe as if they were living in a village. Of course, security is not just a matter of patrols and watchfulness. To maintain it, you sometimes have to fight. And in the second part of his biography, It-Ibi describes his part in the wars. The overlord of Zauti was a warlord, and he was proud of his deeds. Quote, "The first time that my soldiers fought against the southern districts, who had come together southward as far as Abu or Elephantine, and northward as far as, location lost, my troops defeated the enemy as far as the southern boundary. When I, It-Ibi, came to the city, I overthrew the enemy, and I drove him as far as the fortress, called the Harbour of the South. The enemy gave to me his land, while I did not re-establish or restore his town. I reached the east bank of the river, sailing upstream." End quote. It-Ibi describes a defensive campaign. The southerners came downriver, striking north towards Zauti or Asyut, but It-Ibi and his forces met them in battle, and apparently the Asyutians were victorious. They repelled the southerners and drove them back to a place called the southern boundary. We're not sure where that was supposed to be, but it seems that the soldiers of Asyut mounted a successful defense, and then pushed the enemy back to their original starting point. Notably, the battle itself might have been nautical, taking place on the river. It-Ibi mentions reaching the west bank of the Nile. This was probably somewhere near Abdju or Abydos, but the fact that he mentions that, and a place called the Harbour of the South, suggests that part of the fight may have been on the water. So It-Ibi was victorious in the defense. But this was not the only battle. In the next part of his biography, It-Ibi and his soldiers had to fight the southerners again, and this time they were willing to go on the offensive. Quote, "Then there came another southern leader, who was like a jackal, with another army from his alliance. I went forth against the foe. There was no fear. He, the enemy, hastened to battle, like a bull going forth. But I did not stop the fight to the very end. I made use of the south wind as well as the north wind, the east and the west winds. The enemy fell in the water. His ships ran aground. His soldiers were like bulls, stampeding when they are attacked and running with their tails between their legs. Fire was put upon the enemy, and I drove out rebellion by the excellent plan of Wep-Wawet, the opener of the ways." End quote. Like his patron deity, Wep-Wawet, It-Ibi opened the ways to his rivals' domains. His troops fought against the Southerners on land and in ship-to-ship combat. And as a skilled leader, beloved of the god, It-Ibi had expertise over the wind, no matter what direction it blew. This master and commander drove his foes to the far side of the river. When the Southerners failed, their fleet was scattered, and It-Ibi pursued. It-Ibi uses animal imagery to emphasize the violence and tumult of the battle. He compares his foes to wild, out-of-control bulls fleeing a predator. That imagery also applies to It-Ibi himself. As a servant of Wep-Wawet, who is a jackal or wolf deity, It-Ibi corralled or herded the cattle, his enemies, wherever he wanted. We can compare this imagery with Intef. That overlord also used animal metaphors to describe the thrill of battle. In his own fight against the Thebans, Intef had compared the battle to the hunting of a hippopotamus, and his victory was like driving a spear into the snout of a great beast. Just in case we ever forget the agricultural, farming background of this culture, the idea of battle goes hand in hand with the violence of nature. Finally, It-Ibi followed up on his victory. His warriors went on the offensive, and he describes the violence that ensued. Quote, "The land was under the fear of my soldiers, and the hinterland was not free from terror. If the enemy made rebellion, I created fire in the southern districts." End quote. With victory in their hands, the warriors of Zauti, the followers of It-Ibi, spread terror and flame. We could chalk this up to over-enthusiasm in the wake of success. But it's not the only occasion in which the Northerners supposedly committed such acts. We'll come back to the supposed terrorism of the Northern rulers in the next episode, but It-Ibi's description of the battle against the Southerners does hint at a violent, destructive phase of conflict. As the two sides battled for control of Abdju and Cheni, Abydos and Thesis, the conflict seems to have become harsher and harsher, and it's noteworthy that It-Ibi's description of fire and terror comes in the second of his battle scenes, almost as if the conflict got worse the longer it extended. It paints a rather dramatic picture, and you can imagine villages and towns in this region suffering terribly as ships and armies pass through their regions, and soldiers fight each other for control. These may have been dark days indeed for the district of Ta-Wer. It-Ibi fought in service of the northern king. He confirms that in his biography when he mentions the northern capital, a city called Khut-Nesut, more commonly known as Herakleopolis. It-Ibi was proud of his service as a war leader, and in another passage he gives a hint of his generalship. It-Ibi describes the promotion of warriors when they had done well. He says, quote, "When a man performed effectively, I placed him at the head of my soldiers." So It-Ibi recognized success and promoted it from the ranks. The vibe, overall, seems to be a man with an egalitarian mindset. As a ruler, he emphasized his ability to listen to petitions and treat people honestly. In governance, he ensured that everyone in his district was protected and secure. And in battle, he recognized talented soldiers and promoted them to command. Of course, we don't know how truthful all of this is. That died with It-Ibi and his followers. But the picture he left for posterity, and which survives in his biography, tells us of a conscientious ruler, a responsive leader, and a victorious, though slightly terrifying warrior. Apparently, the House of Khety were lucky to have him. It was not the only governor of Asyut, or Zauti, who is significant in this period. We'll meet more as our story unfolds, and the city's rulers have an important part to play in the unfolding conflict. For now, let's pause for a few moments and catch our breath, and maybe take a break from the biographies to look at some art. Like most of their contemporaries, the lords of Asyut commissioned elaborate monuments to preserve their burials, and like most wealthy tombs, these monuments are decorated. Graves at Asyut and a nearby cemetery called Beni Hassan preserve many images of the First Intermediate period. These tombs cover several decades and generations, but they share similar images, styles, and subject matter. And one of the most common motifs in this art is war. In the tombs of Asyut and Beni Hassan, we have large murals of the Egyptian civil war. Some of these images are simple, ranks of soldiers that march alongside the overlords, bodyguards protecting their master. We also have soldiers on the field of battle. Archers gather their bows and arrows as they approach the battlefield. Infantry fight one another in hand-to-hand combat. We even have images of sieges, attacks on city walls to overwhelm the defenders. These images are numerous and varied. My description here is going to jump between several of them from the tombs of Beni Hassan and Asyut. If you'd like to learn more about any of these, you can find references in the episode description. And on the Patreon, I've put a booklet with extended captioning and breakdowns of individual images. The images from these tombs have a variety of subjects. One of the common motifs is the hand-to-hand combat, as infantrymen face off against one another using a variety of weapons. Sometimes they use clubs or spears to duel one another, almost like the ancient sport of Ta'tib, which we described in the Old Kingdom. In other times, soldiers march forward with shields and carrying large axes. The axes have a half-moon blade, a sort of semicircle bound to the shaft. The shields appear to be wood covered with animal skin, probably from cows, and the infantrymen use these shields to guard against their enemies' blows, while raising their axes, prepared to counterattack. Beyond these infantrymen, the other major component are the archers. Almost every battle scene from the tombs of Asyut or Beni Hassan includes bowmen of some sort, and they appear both in field battles, shooting point blank at their enemies, or they appear in sieges. One of the common motifs, especially in the Beni Hassan tombs, is the assault upon a fortified city. In these images, armies march against the walls of the towns. They bring special equipment like battering rams and large wooden scaffolds or shields to protect them from arrows. The scenes are large, some of them stretch across entire walls, with dozens or hundreds of individual figures. The images are detailed, so we can't cover everything, but some of these battles are remarkable. For example, in one scene, we find a town under siege. The city has high walls with crenellations on the battlements, and they seem to have protrusions or walkways extending out from the top of the walls. Defenders stand at the top of these cities, firing arrows and hurling javelins down upon the foe. Beneath the walls, the attackers come with bows, infantry, and siege equipment. In this scene, a trio of soldiers appear, holding a long wooden pole that might be a battering ram or perhaps a hooked halberd-like tool. They are lifting the pole up against the ramparts of the enemy town, as if they are using it to attack the soldiers upon the walls, or perhaps damage the mud bricks which form the masonry. To either side of these sappers, archers stride forward to loose arrows and provide covering fire. Speaking of archers, let's talk about the bowmen. In another scene, archers are preparing to attack a city. They stand in a variety of poses. One dude is kneeling, with a leg stretched out before him. He has raised his bow high off the ground, and he peers down the sight, so to speak, ready to fire. Behind him, another archer is standing tall, also readying to loose. In the 2D format of these images, it seems like the soldiers are standing one behind the other, as if the archers have trained to fire in ranks, one kneeling in the front and one standing behind. That could be an illusion based on the medium, but if you've ever appreciated old-school musket and rifle tactics, with multiple ranks firing at once, this image might give an ancient hint of the same. It's really cool. Behind those archers, a third man is preparing his bow. I like this guy a lot because he seems to be having a bit of trouble. The man's bow is tall, almost as tall as him, and he has raised one leg up to lean on the bow itself. I'm guessing that he is stringing the weapon, pulling the cord between the two ends to ready the bow for firing. But I could be wrong. The image is a bit unclear, and archery is not my specialty. I'll put an image of this in the description and on the website. If you are an archer, let me know what you think he's doing. One notable feature of the archers is that they seem to bring their pets. The bowmen often have dogs accompanying them, even into battle. The dogs have long legs with pricked-up ears, sharp-pointed snouts, and tails that curl up over their backs. These are probably the dogs called chesem, or hunting dogs, an old breed that shows up around 3200 BCE, centuries before the Egyptian kingdom was even unified. It must be a common animal because the same type of hound appears in the tomb of Intef, far to the south. In that tomb, a whole battalion of archers march along one wall. Those archers have dogs with them, and they are the same breed. The dogs never appear in the fight, they just stand behind their masters or walk alongside them. But their presence is noteworthy. At this point in history, there seems to be a strong connection between archers and chesem hounds. This makes sense. In peacetime, a skilled bowman is worth their weight as a hunter, and the hunting dogs do not just disappear when it's time for war. You can imagine that archers, with their dogs, would be especially effective as scouts and patrols, able to shoot foes at a distance, or, if they're running, chase them down with hounds. The chesem dog, which seems to be a kind of greyhound, is quite popular in armies of the time, and as we'll see a bit later, their popularity reached the very highest levels of their society. The battle scenes at Beni Hassan and Asyut are large, detailed, and informative. They give us an idea of siege warfare during the middle of the First Intermediate Period. The cities, or fortresses, have high walls with protruding or overhanging battlements. They have crenellations to protect the soldiers on top. And the walls themselves have a slope, or glacis, at the base, to strengthen the foundations and make it harder for someone to directly attack the wall itself. The towns, or forts, appear to be strong. It is also clear that archers would dominate these scenes, unleashing volleys against the city defenders and providing cover fire for the infantry and sappers. Melee fighting, when it appears, is violent. Over and over, we see bands of infantry marching against one another. They carry their shields, javelins, clubs, and axes, and the fighting is fierce and deadly. In a couple of scenes, we find piles of bodies in the aftermath of battle. Corpses lie jumbled together, and victorious warriors stride among them, striking down with clubs or axes, apparently confirming the kill. While the bloodshed unfolds, rank upon rank of foot soldiers and bow-wielding archers march forward into the fray. Like the death corps of Krieg, they stride fearlessly towards death. The big feature of these scenes, that I haven't mentioned yet, is who is doing the fighting. Until now, most images of battle, the ones that appear in Old Kingdom tombs, show the Egyptian army fighting against foreigners, people of the hill countries, the eastern delta, or the Sinai and Canaan. These enemies, quote-unquote, appear in every battle scene before the First Intermediate Period. But here, in the tombs of Beni Hassan and Asyut, we see something different. In these battles, both armies appear to be Egyptian. There is little to no distinction between the soldiers of one side or the other. The armies are not 100% Egyptian. Foreigners do appear here and there, particularly Easterners with their distinctive costumes, skin coloration, and personalized weapons. These troops are interesting, and we'll come back to them in the next episode. But they are a minority. Overall, the tombs of Asyut and Beni Hassan paint an overwhelmingly Egyptian military force. The artists are presenting this as an internal conflict. With that in mind, it seems quite likely that the battle scenes from Beni Hassan and Asyut record the civil war between the southern kingdom of Intef II and the northern kingdom, the House of Khety. Granted, these tombs are spread across time and generations, so they're not necessarily showing the same battles in every single scene. That being said, there is a distinctive feature about this art. The battle scenes in these tombs, especially the ones from Beni Hassan, have some identical or repeating features. In multiple tombs, we'll see the same fortress, the same soldiers, even the same engagement between individual warriors. With that in mind, it seems like the battle scenes are not showing a series of wars lasting decades, but rather they're showing a single war, a single conflict that was remembered for generations and was immortalized in art. The date and location of this conflict is unclear. The murals do not include hieroglyphs to say which town or which soldiers are being depicted. But in the context, I'm willing to bet that the tombs show a siege, or sieges, occurring in this region during the 21st century BCE. And in my assessment, they are most likely memories of the war for Ta-Wer. That lack of hieroglyphs might actually support my argument. If the Egyptians were engaging in a massive and bloody civil war, the people commemorating these scenes may not have wanted to immortalize that specific aspect. They wanted to record the conflict and their participation in great battles and events, but the lack of specific labels or hieroglyphs might suggest they didn't want to record who exactly they were fighting. Again, that is total speculation on my part. But when other battle scenes from earlier and later periods are happy to include details about the actions of these soldiers, the fact that the tombs of Beni Hassan and Asyut do not include those details, that leaves me slightly suspicious. That is just a hypothesis. I could easily be wrong. But the battle scenes are nearly identical, which suggests they have a common ancestor or inspiration point. If I had to put my money somewhere, I would say these battle scenes record or commemorate the Khety-Intef conflict. We'll come back to these tombs as the story continues to unfold. There are more details to cover and more information to extract from the lords of these cities. For now, the tombs of Beni Hassan and Asyut are one of our best sources, visually, for the Egyptian Civil War. The battle for Ta-Wer raged, and soldiers like Jari from the south or It-Ibi from the north recorded their efforts to engage the enemy and bring them to violent submission. From the biographies and the tomb art, we get a sense of a particularly violent conflict. The region of Ta-Wer, the Elder Land that includes the cities of Abdju and Cheni, may have suffered terribly in these battles. Based on the art and the inscriptions, we get a sense of cities attacked and destroyed, regions plundered to take away tribute or tax, quote-unquote, for the benefit of the rulers. Military leaders like It-Ibi boast of the terror that their soldiers could cause, and they were proud of spreading fire in the enemy territories, even allowing for exaggeration or boastfulness on the part of the ancient rulers. It sounds like this civil war was not particularly civil. We don't have a clear timeline for this conflict. It may have taken place over several years, perhaps even a decade or longer. The ambiguity comes from the sources themselves, which seem to paint a picture of power seesawing between the north and the south. From the biographies of Ibi and Jari, we get a sense of the two sides attacking, counterattacking, and maneuvering against one another, trying to find advantage. All the while, the villagers and people of this region suffered the devastation of their land, the plundering of their wealth for the sake of tribute, and, in some cases, the burning of farms or perhaps even cities. But the conflict could not last forever, and we do have a description of its resolution, a description that is remarkably theatrical. While the lords of Asyut resisted, quite fiercely according to Eat Ebi, they ultimately failed in their goals. At some point during Intef II's reign, the district of Ta-Wer, the Elder Land, fell completely to the southern ruler. We hear this from the king himself. On a stone stela erected at his tomb in Waset, Intef II described the last phases of the battle. He said, quote, "I, Intef, drove in the mooring stake at the Valley of Praise. I captured the district of Khety to its limits. I opened all of its fortresses, and I made it into the door of the north." End quote. Intef describes victory over the northern enemy. He phrases this in nautical terms, that he made a mooring place, that is, a place to safely land or park his boats at a particular northern location. This was the Wadi Hesi, which is located downriver from the city of Khety, or Thinis. The Wadi Hesi is in the 10th district of southern Egypt. Abdju and Khety are in the 8th district, and Asyut, or Zauti, is in the 12th district. In other words, Intef II had gone past the city of Khety, pushed 20 to 30 kilometers downriver, and set his boundary closer to Asyut. He called this boundary the Door to the North, or A'a Mehu, a name that clearly indicates his intent to go even further. Intef's declaration of a boundary at the Wadi Hesi is quite interesting. Geographically, he's clearly gone past the city of Khety, which could mean one of two things. Either Intef and his soldiers had captured Khety and were now free to push further downriver, or the king had actually gone past this troublesome bastion to secure territory further north. That second interpretation could actually be more likely, because the Thebans had done this kind of thing before. Last time, we saw the armies of Waset under the command of Intef I try to encircle their rivals at the city of Gebtu, or Koptos. In order to defeat those rivals, the Thebans had bypassed Gebtu itself and taken another town called Iyunet, or Dendera, to the north. By doing this, the Thebans could cut the city of Gebtu off from any assistance. They could block the Nile River both downstream and upstream, and with control of the desert roads, they could theoretically prevent supplies or reinforcement reaching the besieged enemy. This diplomatic or military encirclement seems to have been quite effective, and Gebtu fell soon after. Perhaps having seen his brother achieve victory with that strategy, Intef II did the same. In the context, it's really unclear whether Intef had already captured Khety. From his phrasing, you could read it either way. He says that he captured the entire district of Khety, that is, the Elder Land to its limits, or Ta-Wer mi Kedef, and he mentions opening the fortresses, Wenni Itechues Neb, but he doesn't mention the city itself, which I think he would have done if he had successfully conquered it. In context, I'm going to assume that Intef did not capture Khety right away, that his declaration of a northern boundary was part of a larger encirclement. That is speculative, but it would fit with their strategy earlier in the war, and it would also fit with another text from one of Intef's servants. For this part of the tale, we need to revisit our friend Jari. Jari, the overseer of troops, had led Theban forces north against the city of Khety. He had mentioned fighting to the west of that city against the northern rivals. Notably, he did not describe a victory. Jari's stela is slightly vague, but his language suggests that his first foray or raid was defeated. The second part of his text, though, presents another stage of the fighting. and it's a remarkably theatrical moment. Jari says, quote, "I was a man of consequence among the companions," that is, the king's entourage. "I was one who is calm at the moment of striking. The king sent me with this message, saying, 'Come near me, Khety, you who caused storm clouds over the district, you who are mighty of rule. At the Valley of Praise I have made my border.'" End quote. Jari's text seems to record a message sent from King Intef II to the ruler of the north. This is an interesting passage. The mention of a storm over the district, or keru-her sepat, is probably a reference to the conflict unfolding in the region. It might refer to some atrocities that the House of Khety allegedly committed in this region. More on that next episode. But in the bigger picture, Intef's message reads loud and clear as a challenge. Throwing down the gauntlet against his northern rival, the king of the south calls upon Khety to come face him directly. So the message is a statement of victory that the Thebans have further extended their territory deeper into Khety's land. It also presents a challenge, suggesting that Intef is now satisfied with his conflicts. He has fixed his boundary and may not intend to go further. In that sense, the message might be saying to the northern ruler, "I have extended my territory, but we can have peace as long as you accept it." From a modern perspective, this sounds slightly absurd. All of the information that we've had so far suggests that the Southerners were the one to start this conflict. After all, it was Intef I who declared himself to be a king, and both he and Intef II had pushed aggressively against their neighbors and their northern rivals. We may never know who fired the first shot, who landed the first blow, but from the surviving evidence, it sounds like the Thebans were responsible, which makes it slightly hypocritical that Intef II accuses Khety of creating such disorder, that he would set his boundary in the north far into Khety's territory and challenge him, "Come face me, bro, I dare you." I don't want to villainize Intef II, we are missing too much information. But what survives definitely paints him as the aggressor.
Is there something wrong?
Will you stop talking about the war?
Me? You started it?
We did not start it.
Yes, you did. You invaded Poland.
That's the military and political interpretation. But there's also a religious angle. The challenge might have a mythological subtext. In 1997, a scholar named John Darnell published a study of this message and compared it with other texts of the same period that use similar language. Intef's message is quite similar to a passage from the biography of Tifi, who lamented the famine that had struck the south. In his biography, Tifi compared the time of hunger to a sort of apocalypse, describing how, quote, "The sky clouded over, and the earth became windy. Every person was dying of hunger on the sandbank of Apep, or Apophis." And another text, which we'll introduce next time, describes the northern king as, quote, "clearing the sky so that he could travel south." In other words, cloudy skies and storms are a strong part of the imagery that describes this period. For the Egyptians, storms have a religious component. Great meteorological events, which the ancients did not understand the natural causes, were easily attributed to certain divine beings. Around 2050 BCE, the Egyptians usually attributed storms to the great gods Apep, Apophis, and Setech, or Seth. Neither of these gods was friendly. Apep, the great devourer, was a constant enemy of the sun god Ra. And Seth was trouble incarnate, the brother and murderer of Osiris, the uncle and rival of Horus. Seth is the archetypal chaotic energy, a being in constant goblin mode all the time. He is also a lord of storms. Intef's declaration accusing Khety of raising a storm, keru-her sepat, essentially calls him out as a troublemaker, a chaos bringer, a reckless tyrant, an incarnation of the destructive powers that Apep and Setech had visited upon the country. The recent hardships, the drought and famine, could easily be laid at the feet of malevolent or disruptive gods. And when Khety, in the north, continued to defy Intef's claim to be the king of southern and northern Egypt, the living incarnation of Horus, well, doesn't that all sound very Seth-like? Khety's continued resistance, his illegitimate claim to be a king, was just begging for Intef to sling some mud. Or sand, whichever is worse in a storm. Obviously, this is pure southern propaganda. We will look at the northern perspective next episode and see how they were dealing with the larger situation. But as the battle for Chenni and the district of Ta-Wer raged, Intef threw down the gauntlet. In dramatic, even theatrical terms, he accused his northern rival of raising chaos, a storm over this region, of bringing violence and bloodshed like the devourer Apep or the chaotic Setech, placing himself as the defender of Abdju, the home of Osiris, and the incarnation of Horus, the lord of kingship. Intef now placed the civil war in dramatic religious terms. It would all be rather silly and overdramatic if it didn't involve the fates of so many people, the violence that had already taken place, the plundering of towns, the spreading of fire and terror, the sieges and field battles. All of that, surely, was taking a heavy toll on the population. In the midst of this uncivil war, Intef II weaponized religion and cast his enemy as the archetype of chaos. With the conquest of Ta-Wer, the setting of a northern boundary, and the possible defeat of Chenni, or Thinis, the southern kingdom was rising strong. But they weren't victorious just yet. Before too long, the northerners would launch a counterattack, and they would come in great force and violence. But that is a story for the next chapter. We'll have to pause our tale here and take stock of everything that has happened. Around 2050 BCE, a new king arose in Waset. He was Intef II, or Intef the Great, possibly the brother of Intef I. He took his predecessor's example, expanding Theban territory, and ran with it. Based on monuments and inscriptions, Intef II seems to have expanded his power over all the southern districts. Going as far upriver as the town of Abu or Elephantine, Intef II took over the rulership. He left monuments like shrines to mark his patronage, and he may have sent diplomats further south to make allies with the lords of Wawat. So Intef had annexed or unified neighboring districts. Now, in the wake of those successes, he began to attack. The king sent his troops under the command of Jemmi to raid the territory of Abdju, in the district called Ta-Wer, the Elder Land. The campaign, either all at once or over time, was successful, and soon the Thebans controlled the sacred city itself. At this moment, we learn about the southern lords like Idudju Iker, the foremost of the rulers of Wawat, northern Nubia, who came as allies to participate in the conquests and honor the gods of Abdju. These records, which are only recently coming to light, paint a more detailed picture of southern power, the alliance or union between different rulers to achieve military victory. Then, the conflict exploded. Another general, named Jari, raided northward against the city of Chenni or Thinis. That city remained part of the northern kingdom, and its defenders were stubborn in the fight. What's more, they had help. Reinforcements came from downriver. The lord of Zauti, or Asyut, brought his fleet and warriors to battle the southern armies. That lord was named It-Ibi, and he described two major engagements between the southern kingdoms. The biography of Itebi and the art from contemporary tombs tells of a violent conflict indeed. Cities besieged, soldiers slain on the battlefield, fleets scattered, and enemies driven away like stampeding beasts. By their own claim, the Northerners spread terror and fire in the southern districts. And later stories that we'll introduce next episode describe similar atrocities occurring in this time. Finally, Intef II made a bold strategic move. He bypassed the city of Chenni, or conquered it outright, and pushed further north. He extended his boundary far downriver to a place called the Valley of Praise. There, he made a declaration, challenging Khety to face him in conflict, or to submit, and not so subtly associating the northern king with chaotic, violent gods. The war was in full swing. It was brutal, bloody, and had picked up a religious underpinning. Intef II's crusade against the north saw huge movements and advances. But then, the northerners struck back. Thank you for listening to the History of Egypt podcast. We have 2 more episodes in the first intermediate period, and then we return to the New Kingdom. Before I go, I would like to thank the priests, my top-tier supporters on patreon.com. These include Arthur, James, Veronica, Ashley, Stephen, Nedin, John, Kyla, Evan, Kendra, Andy and Chelsea, Kevin, Andrea, Mykost, Yola, TJ, Terry, Eric, and Linda. Folks, thank you so much for your generous support. May your fortresses remain secure and unopened by your enemies. May your land be free from any burning or terror. And may whichever gods you worship enjoy their offerings and reward you with great bounties. To everyone listening, thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you soon.